So day 20, you know, it's so natural to feel, because I'm not, so this is not a diet, and that's what's messing up my head, because I'm trying to work through my thoughts, my patterns, my habits, analyzing my body, analyzing my brain, analyzing why I do what I do when when I feel I'm craving a certain food, when I'm wanting something, you know, I'm working out when it's time to give in versus not give in. You know, there's a lot going on, and that's kind of the process that I have to remind myself, and I want to remind people through, because yes, there's, you know, working through this window of eating the different things, the different stuff, whatever, like as a base versus, and then analyzing the foods within that to test and work through the brain. So it's like the cognitive therapy components and the different things in the body, and then how I feel about my body. And I'm really having to be honest with myself in a lot of the process. I struggle with seeing, and this is why I'm actually, because I eliminated the scale before. And when I eliminated in my life before, I was good and able to manage, but I also wasn't trying to make changes. Like, my focus wasn't on my body. And I do realize, I told myself I wasn't caught up on numbers, but I am. And it's a tough thing, right? Because it's like in my head, I'm setting these goals, right? So for whatever, for myself and wanting to be less, because I'm like, well, I liked my body at that weight, those things, whatever. But I have to understand, and I even said it yesterday to myself too, and I haven't started the training process. I'm going to really training. If anything, in this process, it's the irony is I actually had to stop kind of training just for a little bit, because my body's going through something, and that's what I'm having a hard time with, because I want to gear up to get back to that. But what type of training, what would I be doing, and everything else, that makes the difference. And my body's requesting a change. That's the funny thing. So it's listening to the body, listening to what it needs, listening to what it wants, which so many of us have a hard time doing. We're trying to force ourselves to do a certain type of thing. That's why at one time, a type of workout works, a sport works. But then our bodies go through cycles where it's craving something else, and if we keep forcing it, that's actually where we wear down, or we don't get the results. It's like sometimes we have to step away for a bit, then to go back. And because I stepped away from weights for years, I'm like, okay, maybe my body does want it back a little bit to see, but I'm physically not able to get there just quite yet, because I have some other things going, but I'm optimistic it'll get there. So the thought process, because I'm like, oh, and I said, going back to where I said this yesterday, if a pound of fat, let's say, takes up, let's say, whatever, for dramatic effect, this much space, right? And a pound of fat, and a pound of muscle takes up this much space, that changes the body. So the weight on the scale wouldn't change. So you can even say, okay, like body fat percentage, looking at those things, yes and yes. Right, that makes a difference. But what you're seeing, and can you see the changes, what you like about your body? And that's why the reflection part is so important. Looking at ourselves is so important. Seeing ourselves for really who we are and what we are, because we lie to ourselves. We really do. Sometimes and that's where, you know, we can watch something on television, we can look at something that sometimes we can assume, well, yeah, I look more like this, right, in my head or whatever, and not. And another time we can, that be on the high end of like really good. And sometimes we do the opposite, and we live in judgment in ways in the world to those things, and a reflection of ourselves, and we don't even realize that. That's why it's so important to know yourself, and especially in this world today. And I say this is so important for the people, and this may or may not be you right now, but either way, right? I said there's two sides of it. The people that have, you know, been the output of, maybe they have a lot of pictures, maybe they have a lot of things that are looked at a lot now. And I say this nowadays with the phone, the difference of like the people that are on social media posting themselves or videos or pictures. But it's funny, if you actually do that often without, and I know, and I say this, there's a lot of people who constantly use filters, constantly are changing their images, their pictures. They have a distort. I've learned doing all of it is important, because then you have but understanding and being able to identify that. Why? Because I've learned, and I've seen this now firsthand, right, in dealing in the influencer world. They have a diluted sense of self too, of what they actually look like versus what they put out there, which is in that there's something in the brain that changes. And being able to recognize both when you're different things at different times for different reasons. And it's even the slight example of, look at the difference of, you know, my hair, right, well, it's not done, but it was done yesterday. So then it's like kind of better, right? And I put on makeup. Okay, the difference of me talking, that's like a different character versus when I was doing, you know, all the videos in the beginning and I come and talk. And it depends, same time of day, either way. But what comes out and what you feel and where that confidence comes from too, right? Like I'm doing this for myself organically and to share in that processing and to understand it. But that's what I want people to get. Like, of course, if I was to do a talk at a university, let's say, and I'm going to have 300 people in the audience, right? I'm going to feel better about my talk myself if I show up, right, wearing something nice. I'm, you know, I have my hair done, I have my makeup done, and I feel like more confident. I have my presentation prepared. I have my notes. I have my stuff. I've practiced. There's so much goes into that versus just, okay, here and I'm showing up and whatever. Okay, well, can you show up for yourself completely naked? Talk to yourself as that naked person, and now go back further and further to every area of your life in your brain at different times. And that's when people say, like, oh, going back to your childhood and the thoughts and the feelings and the stuff, and that's a lot of work. And blah, blah, blah. And a lot of people don't want to do that, but it has absolute relevance to where you're at today. It does. And if you're struggling, and I say that, you might not have to, but if you're a person who can't seem to get results or spinning out or has had issues, you know, the same issues on repeat that's holding you back from getting the other things you want in your life. So let's say you, like, maybe, right, everybody has different circumstances. You want to find the right partnership and marriage and happiness. You know, you might be doing really well in your career, but that seems to suffer. You seem to, like, whatever, for whatever reason. Okay, well, then I would say you need to, like, really stop trying and really focus on that for a second. You'd have to actually pause trying and look at yourself and what you're attracting and why you're doing that and everything else. Same thing with if you know, you might have the great relationship and family and life, and then you find you're missing and lacking and you don't feel fulfilled in your career and you feel held back. Well, then you'd have to, like, really step back and take time to analyze yourself to get to that next layer and those things. And actually, ironically, because we don't do that, is actually why we carry weight. It's the stress of a lot of times doing for others and not really attending to our needs and ourselves. And you say, well, I have all of these whatever things. You don't actually have to do anything. That's the biggest misconception. There's nothing in life you have to do. There's a consequence if you don't do them. There's a consequence, but you don't have to do them. It's like you don't have to pay your bills. You don't. It's a consequence. You won't have the things you have, right? You won't be living where you're living. You won't have those things. That's, well, I don't want that consequence. Okay, well, then that's a choice. It's a choice. And say, I'm learning the product, like, bless your bills. Like, thank you for this electricity bill, because then that means I get electricity. It's a way of framing our brains, and we working through that process to change that programming takes a long time. I'm working through it too, and not getting so caught up in those things, but recognizing, okay, when, right, and I said, it depends on this, right? I can come on and do this, right? Instead, now I'm looking at myself different. That's why I say with influencers, come on and do this video. Yeah, well, I can have, that can, one, do a message to other people, but a diluted message to myself of where I'm really at. And that's why I'm doing this way, right? When am I at? That's just the process. And working through what comes up and then getting rid of those layers so we can break down to rebuild.